Welcome back to Snetterton, where we had even worse conditions for the second race for the F3 Cup. Zachary Clayman de Mello took pole position ahead of Aaron Steele. Daniel Tapinos, who starred in the first race, took third place ahead of Stuart Wiltshire, followed by Henry Chart in fifth. But as you can see, a wet track and wet tyres. Clayman de Mello on the left and Aaron Steele on the right as we get ready for the start. And de Mello gets away cleanly. Aaron Steele not away quite so well. Very, very narrow start-finish line at Snetterton. And just look at all that spray as the field head down towards Riches on the first lap. Flashing red lights at the back of all the F3 Cup cars to assist the drivers with the visibility, because it can be very, very hard in these conditions. As you can see, down to Montreal for the first time. Clayman de Mello very, very wide, and Daniel Tapinos knocked into a spin and facing the wrong way around, having to get going once again, but he's fallen all the way down to last place. But Clayman de Mello, meanwhile, looking to follow up his victory in the first race with a second, and leading the field around the long left-hander at Palmer and pressing on. So Clayman de Mello it is in the lead, and we may have another driver off here. Now there is Clayman de Mello still in the lead as they come out. Aaron Steele in second place, and in third it is Henry Chart ahead of Jacopo Sebastiani, who's moved up to fourth place, having started from sixth on the grid. Drivers now through the left-hander at Hamilton and pick out a braking point for Odgies. A tricky little corner which opens up on the exit, and the drivers feed the power on and now head towards the long right-hander at Williams, a big, broad, constant apex corner, and that brings them onto the Bentley Straight, where they will head towards top speed. But already up at top speed, Zachary Clayman de Mello has got himself a healthy lead in his Carling car, well ahead of Aaron Steele. Third place there is Henry Chart ahead of Jacopo Sebastiani, and we wait to see just how far back Daniel Tapinos has fallen and whether he's going to be able to make the same kind of overtaking moves in this race that he did to such great effect in the first. Well, there he is, quite a way further back. But Zachary Clayman de Mello has basically got this race as a private test session for himself, because he's got no one anywhere near the back of him and he has plenty of clear air ahead of him. Not exactly ideal conditions for motor racing, but nonetheless very useful experience for the Canadian driver who has stepped up from karting this year into single-seaters. And behind him, a little bit of a way further back, Aaron Steele, and just ducking out of the slipstream there, Henry Chart, possibly trying to get a little bit better visibility or just make sure that his car's air intake has got water-free air to allow his engine to run at its very best. And running still quite wide there, taking an alternative line at the Montreal hairpin and accelerating out of it for Aaron Steele. Henry Chart following along behind him for now, not able to draw any closer, and nor behind them is Jacopo Sebastiani in fourth place. But the conditions, though bad, are at least not getting dramatically worse. And we've got a bit of side-by-side action up at turn 1, Riches. That is Adrian Holy alongside James Lederman, trying to make a move for position, and so far appearing to make it stick. And they head on down to Montreal to continue on another lap. But you can see just how difficult the conditions are for these drivers at Snetterton. Lots and lots of water, giving testament to just how difficult this race is. Waiting for the cars to come back into view down at Riches. It's a very long lap of Snetterton since they extended this circuit, and meanwhile off in the middle of it here still is Aaron Steele, pursued by Henry Chart. And the rain now, I think, coming down even more heavily than it was before. And what we have now is an extremely wet track, and the drivers are going to be increasingly concerned about the development of standing patches of water around the circuit, because that is the one thing you really don't want to see. It's very easy to aquaplane off and lose control. As Louis Hamilton Smith passes by in 5th place, followed by Wade Eastwood, and there is Daniel Tapinos continuing his recovery. He had Stuart Wiltshire quite a bit closer to him a few laps ago, but Wiltshire appears to have dropped back as Tapinos continues to press on. But this is still the closest battle that we have in the field at the moment, and very, very oversteery at the exit of Murray's. That was Aaron Steele, and that is going to give Henry Chart an opportunity to close in on him as they come back towards Riches, but just look how bad the spray is, and Chart once again having to duck well out of the wake of Aaron Steele's car because the visibility is pretty terrible now, and clearly the rain is tipping down ever harder now. Is he going to be able to make a move as they come down to Montreal? Aaron Steele very, very wide at the slowest corner on the track. It's named after one of the hairpins at the Montreal Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, visited by the Formula 1 World Championship, and it is a pretty close approximation of the tightness and the radius of that corner. And jockeying for position now, we've got Daniel Tapinos up on the back of Wade Eastwood, so these two are starting to scrap for position, but Tapinos not able to make a move just yet. There is Henry Chart. He went off twice in the first race, which was run in conditions not quite as wet as these, and when the rain started to tip down very late in the stages before the race began, all the drivers decided to stick with their slick tyres, making for a very difficult situation indeed, and Chart lost contact on 2 occasions, and that ultimately dropped him out of the podium places, but he's looking certainly a little bit more secure in these conditions now that he has the benefit of the proper full treaded wet weather tyres, which have deep grooves in them, and the grooves are there not just to channel the water up and suck the water out from the ground, but they're there because it allows the tread blocks of the tyres to move a little bit more in these very damp and cool conditions. It allows the rubber to heat up more, and ultimately it's the heat of the rubber and the chemical reaction that it makes with the asphalt which gives the drivers their grip. Grooves are basically just there to help get the water out of the way and ensure that there's as much contact as possible between rubber and road. So both of those drivers trying to ensure that their tyres give them the best possible grip. The driver at the front with the best possible visibility remains Zachary Clayman de Mello, clearly not a superstitious chap, quite happy to wear the number 13 on his Carlin car, which is always good to see, and not in the least bit bothered about the conditions at the moment, and quite a few drivers preferring that wider line at Montreal, perhaps away from the rubber build-up at the inside of the corner. And there is Lewis Hamilton Smith, car number 3, with the white and red livery, looking very much like something the ART team might run in their typical livery in GP3 or Formula Renault 2 litre. But there he is, pressing on, trying to get onto terms with Jacopo Sebastiani, who didn't run so well in the first wet race around Snetterton, but for the time being at least is able to keep Lewis Hamilton Smith some way behind him, albeit he's not been able as yet to get on terms with the drivers in the top 3. There is Alf Skeels in his very distinctive lime green nosed car. He's basically got a chunk of track to himself now, though somewhere towards the rear of the field, but still pressing on. Lewis Hamilton Smith, it's not hard to notice the similarity between his name and a certain other famous Formula 1 multiple champions, and if there's ever a driver who would like to match up to the reputation of his near namesake, there is surely one of them. And Hamilton Smith tucking up quite closely to the back of Jacopo Sebastiani, but it's not always the case. We often think that when there is a wet weather race it's easier for drivers to make overtaking moves, but when the conditions are quite as bad as this and the visibility is so poor, it's not always quite as easy as that, because the closer he gets to the F3 car in front of him, the more difficult the conditions are going to be. And it must be said that Sebastiani in front of him clearly has the benefit of a more recent F3 chassis, which may well be giving him a little bit of a downforce advantage here as well. And of course you have to consider the perennial problem for single-seater racing drivers, that is, whenever you get closer to the car in front, because they have more downforce, they take the downforce away from you and it gets harder to stay up with them. But for the time being at least, Hamilton Smith tucked up in the huge amount of spray coming out from the back of Jacopo Sebastiani's car. But as they come past the pits for the latest time, although the track remains very wet, the conditions do seem to be brightening up a little bit, which is definitely to their advantage. We've got a replay of some action further back, and this looks like Wade Eastwood losing and then retaking the position from Daniel Tapinos. Tapinos was trying to make a move stick on him, and it looks like we had the positions exchanged twice between the pair of them, so it's as you were in that battle. However, Lewis Hamilton Smith has now drawn alongside Jacopo Sebastiani, and that is a very fine pass indeed. A difficult part of the circuit to make an overtaking move stick. A alongside into the bomb hole, but he got better traction out of Nelson, and he now leads his rival through that ultra long sweeping right-hander at Coram. Picks out a braking point for Murray's the sharp left-hander. It brings the car speed back under control, and now they filter back past the start-finish straight and the pits area, move Louis Hamilton-Smith up one place in your lap charts, and move Jacopo Sebastiani down one. So Sebastiani, once again, perhaps not getting the very best from his car in these very, very tricky conditions. But if racing in Britain teaches you anything, it teaches you a fair bit about how to handle a racing car in less than ideal conditions, and that is certainly what we have here. And Louis Hamilton-Smith is now, I think, probably going to start edging away from his rival. And judging from the livery on Jacopo Sebastiani's car, I would not be in the least bit surprised if that turned out to be an F3 car previously piloted by Jasmine Jafar in his successful foray into British Formula 3 a few years ago. Sadly, no British Formula 3 championship to speak of these days, but we do still have the F3 Cup, which brings drivers in multiple different F3 chassis together. Here is Zachary Clement de Mello in one of the best of them, and he's made best use of it indeed. He takes the checkered flag for the second time this weekend. It's another victory for Zachary Clement de Mello in the Carling car number 13. Mission accomplished for him at Snetterton. So a win for Zachary Clement de Mello. Henry Chart holds on to take second place ahead of Aaron Steele. We saw Louis Hamilton-Smith move up to fourth at the expense of Jacopo Sebastiani. So De Mello takes the victory, but Chart takes the spoils because De Mello is an invitational driver, whereas Chart is a championship regular. So it is he who stands on the top step of the podium at Snetterton.